My name is Elena Chen, and I want you to imagine getting a phone call that tears your world in half. I was 19 years old, halfway through my second year at Stanford, when my phone rang at exactly 3:47 a.m. on March 16, 2016. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm, as it delivered the news. My brother, Daniel, was dead. Suicide, they said. He'd been found in his dorm room at MIT, lying beside a note that confessed to stealing over $2 million from international student families. At first, I thought it was some kind of twisted mistake. I even laughed. Not because I didn't believe he was gone, that part hadn't even registered yet, but because the story they were telling me made absolutely no sense. Daniel Chen, a thief? A con artist? The same brother who used to give away his lunch to classmates who forgot theirs, who corrected cashiers when they gave him too much change, who once spent an entire weekend helping a struggling freshman study for finals for free. He wasn't just a good person. He was the kind of good that made people feel ashamed of their own selfishness. And now I was being told that he was some kind of criminal mastermind? A manipulator? A gambling addict? By the time I got on a plane to Boston, the FBI had already locked in their story. The media followed. Headlines called him a fraud. His reputation was shredded before we even had a chance to bury him. But here's what no one knew then, what I didn't know either, at least not yet. Daniel didn't steal that money. He didn't write that note. He didn't kill himself. He was murdered. And the person responsible wasn't some anonymous shadow in the dark. He was real, brilliant, dangerous, and completely untouchable. So I did the only thing I could. I walked away from the life that had been so carefully planned for me, pre-med, med school, clean record, predictable future, and I became someone else entirely. Not fearless, not invincible. Just a girl who loved her brother enough to face the dark with nothing but a shaky voice and stubborn heart. I was scared, but I had enough courage to go looking for the truth. To chase justice for the boy who used to walk on the farthest side of the sidewalk because he was afraid of accidentally bumping into someone. The boy who refused to learn how to drive because he couldn't bear the thought of hurting anyone. Daniel was gentle, honest, kind in ways the world doesn't always reward. And someone had used that against him. I didn't plan for what came next. I didn't expect to get pulled so deep into a world I never even knew existed. But once I took the first step, there was no turning back. And if you believe in loyalty that doesn't break, in justice that doesn't always wear a badge, and in breaking every rule when the system fails, then stay with me. Because this isn't just a story about what happened to my brother. It's the story of how I found the man who took everything from us. And what I did when I finally caught him. Let me tell you about my brother Daniel, because understanding who he was makes what happened to him even more heartbreaking. Daniel was everything I wanted to be. For years older, MIT computer science major, the kind of brilliant that made professors remember his name years later. But more than that, he was kind in a way that seemed almost impossible in this world. Our parents immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but hope and determination. They worked double shifts, mom cleaning offices at night, dad driving delivery trucks during the day, just to give us opportunities they never had. Daniel understood that sacrifice in his bones. That's why he spent his free time helping other international students navigate American systems that seemed designed to confuse them. Banking, taxes, scholarship applications. Daniel would spend hours walking students through processes that native speakers took for granted. He never charged a penny. We look out for each other, he'd tell me. That's how we survive. So when I got that phone call telling me Daniel had killed himself after confessing to running an identity theft ring targeting those same families, my first thought wasn't grief. It was rage. Not at Daniel, at whoever was lying about him. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged documents in Daniel's dorm room, social security cards, bank statements, fake IDs. Multiple bank accounts in his name containing hundreds of thousands of dollars. A detailed money trail showing how funds had been systematically drained from victim accounts and funneled through a network of false identities. The suicide note was typed on Daniel's laptop, signed in what looked like his handwriting. It confessed to everything: gambling debts that spiraled out of control, desperation that led him to betray the trust of families who saw him as a son, guilt that finally became unbearable. The FBI investigation was swift and brutal. Agent Morrison, the lead investigator, laid it out for my parents and me in a sterile conference room that smelled like industrial coffee and broken dreams. Your son had access to all the victims' personal information through his tutoring activities, Morrison explained, sliding photograph after photograph across the table. Social security numbers, family financial details, emergency contacts. He gained their trust, then systematically robbed them blind. The victims were devastating to hear about. The Kim family had sent their life savings, $47,000, for their daughter's MIT tuition. Gone. The Nakamura family's emergency medical fund for their sick grandmother, $23,000. Vanished. 12 families total, most of them scraping together every dollar to give their children opportunities in America. And all of them had trusted Daniel Chen. We see this more often than you'd think, Morrison said, his voice professionally sympathetic. Bright kids who get in over their heads with gambling, drugs, whatever. They start small, tell themselves they'll pay it back, then it spirals. I wanted to scream, to flip that conference table and demand they actually investigate instead of just closing the case. But the evidence was too perfect, too comprehensive. Within a week, the FBI had labeled Daniel's death a suicide, his crime solved, case closed. The shame destroyed our family immediately. Our father had a heart attack 3 days after Daniel's funeral. The stress, the shock, the complete collapse of everything he'd believed about his perfect son. Our tight-knit Taiwanese American community turned their backs on us overnight. Whispers followed us everywhere. The Chen family had raised a thief, a gambler, a boy who betrayed his own people. I took a leave of absence from Stanford and spent 6 months trying to hold our family together while my father recovered and my mother cried herself to sleep every night. But inside, I was planning, because I knew something everyone else refused to see. Daniel would have died before hurting those families. Actually, that's exactly what happened. Someone killed him precisely because he would never have betrayed them willingly. For 18 months, I lived in a special kind of hell. Not just grief. I could have handled grief. This was something worse. This was watching the world believe a lie about the person I loved most and being powerless to change it. I tried everything the system supposedly offered. I called Agent Morrison every week until he stopped taking my calls. I hired 3 different private investigators with money I didn't have, borrowed against my parents' already destroyed credit. Each one came back with the same conclusion. The evidence against Daniel was ironclad. I understand you loved your brother, one investigator told me, sliding his final report across a diner table. But sometimes the people we love aren't who we think they are. I wanted to throw my coffee in his face. Instead, I paid his bill and added his name to my growing list of people who had failed Daniel. I tried reaching out to the victim families, thinking maybe they'd seen something suspicious, some detail the FBI had missed. That was the most heartbreaking part of all. These families, already destroyed by losing their life savings, were dealing with the additional trauma of learning they'd been betrayed by someone they'd trusted as family. Mrs. Kim, whose daughter Sarah had been one of Daniel's closest tutoring students, actually hung up on me when I called. "Your brother took food from my grandchildren's mouths," she said, her voice breaking. "We trusted him like a son. How could you call me?" That's when I understood the true genius of what had been done to Daniel. Whoever framed him hadn't just killed him, they'd made sure he could never be mourned properly, never be remembered with love. They'd poisoned every relationship he'd built, every life he'd touched. But they made one crucial mistake. They didn't kill his sister. The moment that changed everything came on a random Tuesday evening in October 2017. I was in my Stanford dorm room, supposedly studying for an organic chemistry exam, but actually staring at Daniel's case files for the 1,000th time when a news report caught my attention. Portland police are investigating a sophisticated identity theft ring targeting international university students. The perpetrator or perpetrators used detailed personal information to access victim bank accounts, draining funds meant for tuition and emergency expenses. My hands started shaking. The method described was identical to Daniel's case. Too identical to be a coincidence. Same victim profile, international students from families with modest savings. Same precision in accessing financial information. Same surgical efficiency in draining accounts without triggering immediate alerts. But Daniel Chen was dead. I rewound the report 3 times, taking notes, comparing details to Daniel's case file. The signature was unmistakable. Someone was still out there, using the exact same methods that had supposedly died with my brother. That's when the horrifying truth hit me like a physical blow. Daniel had never been the perpetrator. He'd been the first victim, killed to cover the tracks of someone who was still operating, still destroying families, still walking free while my brother rotted in the ground under a headstone that might as well have read thief. Right there in my dorm room, staring at that news report, I made a decision that would consume the next 8 years of my life and transform me into someone I barely recognize today. If the system wouldn't find justice for Daniel, I would build my own system. If law enforcement couldn't catch this monster, I would become something more dangerous than any cop or FBI agent. I would become the monster's equal, then superior. I would learn every skill the killer possessed, then use those skills to destroy him so completely that his name would become a cautionary tale. And if that sounds like the beginning of the most satisfying revenge story you've ever heard, hit that like button. Because Elena Chen, pre-med student, died that night. What was born in her place was something much more dangerous. The next morning, I walked into Stanford's registrar office and dropped my pre-med track. My academic advisor, Dr. Peterson, looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Elena, you're 2 years from medical school. Your MCT scores were exceptional. Why would you throw that away? I looked him straight in the eye and said, because I found a different kind of healing to pursue. I switched my major to computer science with a minor in forensic accounting. But my real education was happening outside the classroom. I spent every free moment teaching myself skills that would have terrified the girl I used to be. Digital forensics, social engineering, document analysis, the psychology of deception. Most importantly, I learned about forgery. Not just how to detect it, though I became obsessed with that too, but how to create documents so perfect they could fool experts. I studied the masters, Franca Bagnale, of course, but also lesser-known artists who had perfected specific techniques. I learned about paper aging, ink chemistry, the subtle imperfections that make fake documents look real. But I also dove deep into Daniel's encrypted files, using skills he'd taught me years ago to crack passwords he'd created. What I found there changed everything. Daniel had been investigating something before his death. His files contained screenshots of suspicious financial transactions, notes about patterns he'd noticed, even recorded conversations with other international students who'd reported strange activities around their accounts. My brilliant brother had been building a case against someone who had access to international student information, someone who understood their vulnerabilities, someone who moved in their social circles with enough authority to gain trust. Through Daniel's research, I identified my target, Marcus Vail. Marcus Vail was everything you'd expect from a master predator, charismatic, intelligent, seemingly successful. He ran international student success workshops through a company called Bridge Cultural Consulting. His seminars covered everything from navigating American banking to building credit as an international student. He had contracts with universities across the country, access to student databases, and most importantly, He positioned himself as a trusted mentor figure. For 3 years, I studied Marcus Vale like he was a disease I needed to cure. I learned his patterns, his methods, his psychology. I discovered he'd been operating for over a decade, moving from city to city, university to university, leaving destroyed families in his wake. But here's what made my revenge plans so perfect. I realized I had advantages that traditional law enforcement didn't. I was young, female, Asian American, and I looked exactly like the type of vulnerable student Vale targeted. More than that, I was willing to do things that cops couldn't do. I was willing to lie, cheat, forge, and manipulate without the constraints of warrants or probable cause. I was willing to become everything I hated to destroy the man who killed my brother. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. I taught myself to lie so convincingly that I sometimes scared myself. I learned to read people's weaknesses and exploit them without mercy. I practiced creating false identities until I could slip into a new persona, like changing clothes. By my senior year at Stanford, Elena Chen existed only on paper. In reality, I had become a weapon designed for one specific purpose: the complete destruction of Marcus Vale. My infiltration of Vale's world began in September 2019. I was 22 years old and had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. I created my first identity, Sarah Martinez, a struggling graduate student at UC Berkeley whose parents had sacrificed everything to send her to America. Sarah was perfect bait. Anxious about money, uncertain about American financial systems, desperate for guidance from someone who understood her struggles. I crafted her backstory carefully: working-class family in Mexico, first-generation college student, part-time job that barely covered expenses. I attended Vale's first workshop at Berkeley's International Student Center on a rainy Thursday evening in October. The room was packed with students who looked exactly like I had 4 years earlier: hopeful, scared, overwhelmed by systems they didn't understand. Vale was magnetic. I'll give him that. Tall, well-dressed, speaking with the kind of authority that made you want to trust him immediately. He talked about his own experience as the son of immigrants, how he'd learned to navigate American institutions through trial and error. "I wish I'd had someone to guide me when I was your age," he told the room, his voice warm with false sincerity. That's why I do this work. Because no student should have to face these challenges alone. I watched him work the room after his presentation, collecting business cards, making personal connections, identifying the most vulnerable students with the precision of a predator selecting prey. When he approached me, I was ready. "Sarah, right?" he said, reading my name tag. "How are you finding the adjustment to American banking systems?" I let my voice shake just slightly. "It's overwhelming, honestly. I'm always worried I'm doing something wrong, that I'll lose what little money my family sent." His eyes lit up, not with kindness, but with opportunity recognized. "I'd love to help you set up some systems that could give you peace of mind. Would you be interested in a one-on-one consultation?" Hook, line, sinker. Over the next 6 months, I met with Vale regularly as Sarah Martinez. He helped me open new accounts, set up automatic transfers, even assisted with what he called creative financial planning, techniques that were perfectly legal but pushed ethical boundaries. But I wasn't his only student. Through my relationship with Vale, I identified his entire network. There was Jennifer Walsh, who ran similar workshops at Stanford; David Kim, who targeted students at USC; Maria Santos, who worked the community college circuit in Los Angeles. They were all connected, all sharing information, all feeding vulnerable students into a machine designed to drain their families' resources systematically. But Vale was the mastermind. The others were just employees. While I was building my relationship with Vale as Sarah, I was also recruiting allies under my real identity. Jenny Wu was a forensic accountant whose younger sister had been victimized by Vale's network 2 years earlier. When I approached her with evidence of the ongoing operation, she didn't just believe me, she wanted in on the takedown. Alex Restrepo was the FBI agent who'd always had doubts about Daniel's case. He'd been the junior agent on the investigation, and something about the evidence had never sat right with him. When I presented him with proof that the same methods were still being used, he agreed to help unofficially. Most importantly, I began building a network within international student communities. Not as Sarah Martinez, but as Elena Chen, Daniel's sister, someone who understood their vulnerabilities because my family had lived through them. These students became my eyes and ears. They reported suspicious activities, shared information about who was asking what questions, and helped me map Vale's operation across multiple universities. But the most crucial part of my plan was patience. For 2 years, I gathered evidence while watching Vale destroy more families. It was agony, knowing I could stop him, but choosing not to act until I had everything I needed for complete annihilation. Because I didn't just want to catch Marcus Vale. I wanted to destroy him so thoroughly that every family he'd hurt would see justice, every dollar he'd stolen would be returned, and his name would become synonymous with the kind of predator that parents warn their children about. Comment below and tell me, could you have watched innocent families get hurt while building a case against the person responsible? Because that was the hardest part of my entire plan. By 2021, I had become someone I barely recognized. 5 years of studying deception had taught me to lie with such natural ease that I sometimes forgot which version of myself was real. I could forge documents that would fool handwriting experts. I could create false identities so detailed they'd credit histories and employment records. I could read people's psychological vulnerabilities and exploit them without a second thought. I had become everything I'd once hated, but it was working. Through my network of student informants, I learned that Vale was planning his biggest operation yet, a scheme targeting the children of wealthy international families, students whose parents had significant assets beyond just tuition money. This was my opportunity. I created a new identity, Lisa Park, daughter of a successful Korean businessman. Lisa's father owned electronics manufacturing plants in Seoul and had sent his precious daughter to America with access to family emergency funds totaling nearly $800,000. Lisa was everything Vale dreamed of: naive, trusting, and connected to serious money. I spent months crafting Lisa's background. Bank statements showing regular large deposits from overseas. Social media accounts documenting a sheltered upbringing of private schools and family wealth. Phone records of daily calls to doting parents who spoke broken English, but trusted their daughters' American mentors completely. When Lisa Park enrolled in Vale's advanced financial planning course in spring 2021, she was irresistible bait. "Your family has done an incredible job building wealth," Vale told me during our first private consultation. "But American tax systems can be complex for international assets. I'd love to help you structure things in a way that protects your family's interests." What he was really saying: "I found a way to steal nearly $1 million, and you're going to help me do it." But while Vale was planning to destroy Lisa Park, Elena Chen was planning to destroy Marcus Vale. I had spent 2 years documenting every aspect of his operation. Bank records obtained through Jenny Wu's forensic connections. Digital evidence gathered through techniques Daniel had taught me. Most importantly, recorded conversations where Vale explained his methods to someone he believed was a naive student. But I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was poisoning Vale's world from the inside. I began feeding his associates false information, making them suspicious of each other. Jennifer Walsh started believing David Kim was skimming from their shared operations. Maria Santos became convinced that Jennifer was reporting her activities to university administrators. Simultaneously, I was anonymously providing information to law enforcement agencies that forced Vale to become increasingly careful and paranoid. Investigations that never quite reached him, but got close enough to make him sweat. Audit flags on his business accounts that required extensive documentation. Immigration reviews of his client relationships that made universities question their contracts with his company. Vale's network was slowly strangling itself, and he didn't even realize I was pulling the strings. The psychological pressure was incredible. Vale went from being a confident predator to a paranoid animal, constantly looking over his shoulder, no longer sure who he could trust. His associates were turning on each other. His business relationships were deteriorating. His carefully constructed identity as a helpful mentor was cracking under scrutiny. But I wasn't finished. Because destroying Vale's current operation wasn't enough. I needed him to pay for what he'd done to Daniel and every family he'd victimized over the past decade. I needed him to confess. The confrontation I'd been planning for 6 years finally came in November 2023. Vale had become so desperate that he was ready to move forward with his plan to steal Lisa Park's family money, despite the increasing heat on his operation. We met at an upscale restaurant in downtown San Francisco, ostensibly so he could explain the final steps in protecting my family's assets. In reality, it was where I would begin destroying him. I sat across from the man who had killed my brother and played the role of naive student one last time. But something was different. Vale kept staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You know," he said, cutting into his steak, "you remind me of someone." It's been bothering me for months. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice steady. People say I have one of those faces. No, it's more specific than that. His eyes narrowed. "You remind me of a student I worked with years ago. Brilliant kid, but he got in over his head with some bad decisions." He was talking about Daniel. Vale was sitting across from me, casually describing my brother like he was just another statistic instead of the person whose death had consumed my entire adult life. "What happened to him?" I asked, letting genuine curiosity color my voice. Vale shrugged. "Suicide. He'd gotten involved in some financial irregularities, couldn't handle the pressure when it all came out. Sad story, really. His family never accepted what he'd done. That's when I knew Vale had no idea who I was. No memory of Daniel's sister, no recognition of the girl who'd sat in FBI conference rooms demanding answers. To him, Daniel had been just another victim, and I was invisible, which made what happened next even more satisfying. "That is sad," I said softly. "What was his name?" "Daniel Chen. MIT student, computer science major. Brilliant kid, but weak character." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, setting it on the table between us. On the screen was a photo of Daniel and me from his MIT graduation, both of us grinning at the camera, his arm around my shoulders. Vale's face went white. "That's my brother," I said, my voice still soft, but no longer playing any role. "The brilliant kid with weak character who supposedly stole money from families he spent his free time helping." Vale started to stand up, but I held up my hand. "Sit down, Marcus. We're just getting started." He sat. Whether from shock or curiosity, I don't know. But he sat. "Do you want to know what Daniel was really doing in the months before you killed him?" I continued, pulling up another photo on my phone, a screenshot of Daniel's encrypted files. "He was investigating you, building a case against your entire operation, getting close enough to expose everything." Vale's hands were shaking now. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do. Daniel Chen was never your victim, Marcus. He was your threat. So you eliminated him and made it look like suicide while framing him for your crimes. Brilliant plan, really. Except for one small oversight." I leaned forward, letting him see exactly who I'd become. "You didn't kill his sister." For the next hour, I laid out everything I knew about Vale's operation. Every victim, every method, every dollar stolen. I showed him photographs of the evidence I'd collected, recordings of our conversations, documentation of his entire network. But more than that, I showed him what I'd done to his world while he wasn't looking. "Jennifer Walsh was arrested this morning," I told him, checking my phone casually. "Tax evasion, fraud, conspiracy. She's already agreed to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence." His face grew paler. "David Kim's been under surveillance for 3 weeks. His bank accounts are frozen, his assets seized. Maria Santos? She disappeared yesterday. Probably in Mexico by now, but I doubt she'll stay hidden for long. Vale tried to speak, but I wasn't finished. But the best part, Marcus, is that it's all going to come out. Every family you destroyed will know that Daniel Chen died trying to protect them. Every dollar you stole will be returned to its rightful owners. And your name? Your name is going to become exactly what it should be, a warning to parents about the kind of predator that targets their children. I stood up to leave, dropping a 20 on the table for my untouched meal. The FBI will be here in about 10 minutes, I said. Agent Alex Restrepo, specifically. He's been wanting to talk to you for years about some irregularities in the Daniel Chen case. As I walked toward the restaurant door, I heard Vale call after me. What do you want? Money? I can pay you more than. I turned back one final time. I don't want your money, Marcus. I want Daniel's name cleared, your victims compensated, and you destroyed so completely that parents will use your story to warn their children about monsters who pretend to help. I paused at the door. Congratulations. You created the perfect weapon to destroy yourself. You just didn't realize it until now. Marcus Vale was arrested that evening on multiple federal charges: wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and conspiracy. The investigation that followed unraveled his entire network and led to the recovery of over $4.2 million in stolen funds. But the sweetest victory came 3 weeks later, when Agent Morrison, the same FBI agent who dismissed Daniel's case as a simple suicide, called to inform me that my brother's case was being officially reopened. We've discovered evidence that suggests Daniel Chen was investigating suspicious financial activities before his death, Morrison said, his voice carefully professional. His case has been reclassified as a potential homicide. I wanted to scream at him that I'd been trying to tell him that for 7 years. Instead, I said, "Thank you. I know this means a lot to my family." Within 2 months, Daniel's case was completely cleared. The FBI issued a formal statement acknowledging that Daniel Chen had been the victim, not the perpetrator, of the identity theft ring. Every news outlet that had reported on his crimes ran corrections. MIT issued a posthumous commendation recognizing Daniel's efforts to protect vulnerable students. Most importantly, the families who had believed Daniel betrayed them finally learned the truth. Mrs. Kim, who had hung up on me years earlier, called to apologize through tears. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "Your brother died trying to protect us. We should have known. We should have believed. But justice for Daniel was only part of my victory." Vale's arrest led to a federal investigation that exposed an entire network of predators targeting international students. 12 other individuals were arrested across 6 states. Victim compensation funds were established. Universities implemented new oversight procedures for anyone working with international student communities. Vale himself received a 25-year federal sentence. At his sentencing hearing, I sat in the front row and watched as family after family gave victim impact statements describing how his crimes had destroyed their lives. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and looked directly at the man who had killed my brother. Marcus Vale didn't just steal money from families, I told the court. He stole their faith in people who claimed to help. He poisoned their ability to trust mentors and guides. Most importantly, he murdered my brother Daniel Chen and tried to destroy his memory by framing him for crimes he would never have committed. I paused, letting that sink in. But Mr. Vale made one crucial mistake. He assumed that destroying Daniel would be enough. He never considered that Daniel had a sister who would spend 8 years learning to become everything he was, just so she could destroy everything he'd built. I looked directly at Vale, who was staring at the table in front of him. Daniel Chen was brilliant, Marcus. But I'm better. I'm more patient. And unlike you, I actually cared about the families you hurt. That's why you lost. As I walked out of that courthouse, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 8 years: peace. But winning came with a price I'm still paying today. I accomplished everything I set out to do. Daniel's name was cleared completely. Vale was destroyed. The families he'd hurt received justice and compensation. His entire network was dismantled, preventing future victims. Yet I look in the mirror some mornings and barely recognize the person staring back at me. I spent my 20s learning to lie, cheat, manipulate, and deceive with such skill that I sometimes scare myself. I can create false identities so convincing they feel more real than my actual life. I can read people's psychological weaknesses and exploit them without hesitation. I can forge documents that would fool experts and tell lies so naturally that I forget they're not true. These aren't skills you can just turn off. They've become part of who I am at a fundamental level. My relationship with my parents has slowly healed, but there's a distance there now that didn't exist before. They're proud that Daniel's name is cleared, but terrified of what their daughter became to make that happen. My mother sometimes looks at me like she's not sure which version of Elena is sitting across from her at dinner. I haven't had a serious romantic relationship since I started this journey. How do you explain to someone that you've spent 8 years living as different people? How do you build trust with another person when deception has become as natural as breathing? The therapy helps, but there are some lines you can't uncross. Some knowledge you can't unknow. I've seen too deeply into human nature's capacity for evil, and I've developed my own capacity to match it. But here's what I keep coming back to when the doubt creeps in. Daniel's voice is clear again. Every article written about his case now describes him as a victim, not a perpetrator. MIT students learn about him as someone who died trying to protect vulnerable classmates. The families he tried to help know that he loved them enough to die for them. That's worth something. Maybe it's worth everything. I've channeled what I learned into something constructive now. The Elena Chen Foundation helps families of wrongly accused suicide victims navigate the legal system and demand proper investigations. We've helped clear the names of 17 people in the past 2 years, using skills I never wanted to have but have learned to use for good. But I won't lie to you, there are nights when I wonder if I went too far. If the person I became to destroy Vale was worse than the person I was trying to stop. Then I remember Mrs. Kim's voice when she called to apologize. I remember Sarah Nakamura crying as she told me how much it meant to know that Daniel had been trying to help her family, not hurt them. I remember Vale's face when he realized that Daniel's little sister had outplayed him completely. And I think, maybe some transformations are worth the cost. My name is Elena Chen, and I spent 8 years becoming someone I never wanted to be so I could destroy the man who killed my brother. Was it worth it? That's a question I'm still answering. I cleared Daniel's name and made sure his memory reflects who he really was, a brilliant, kind young man who died trying to protect families that trusted him. I brought justice to victims who thought they'd never see their stolen money again. I dismantled a network of predators and prevented countless future victims. But I also lost 8 years of my life to revenge. I became skilled at deception, manipulation, and psychological warfare. I learned to see human weaknesses and exploit them without mercy. These aren't skills that come with an off switch. The question isn't whether Marcus Vale deserved what happened to him. He absolutely did. The question is whether the person I became to deliver that justice was worth the price I paid to become her. Some nights, I'm not sure. Other nights, when I get a call from a family whose loved one's name has been cleared because of our foundation's work, I know the answer absolutely. Daniel Chen deserved better than the story that was written about him in death. He deserved better than being remembered as a thief instead of the protector he actually was. He deserved a sister who would fight for his truth no matter what it cost her. I became that sister. Whether that makes me a hero or something else entirely, that's for you to decide. But I want you to understand something. The system failed Daniel completely. Law enforcement, the media, even our own community, everyone accepted the lie because it was easier than questioning the evidence. If I hadn't fought for him, Daniel would be remembered forever as the young man who betrayed families that loved him. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or cops or official investigations. Sometimes it comes from the shadows, delivered by someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Sometimes it comes from love disguised as revenge. What do you think? Was my 8-year hunt for justice worth the person I became to achieve it? Let me know in the comments below, because this is a question I'm still wrestling with every day. And if you believe that some stories are worth fighting for no matter the cost, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Because the world is full of people whose true stories have been buried under lies, and sometimes they need someone willing to dig them up. They found my brother's body on a Tuesday morning. It took me 8 years to find his killer. Some people call that justice. Others call it revenge. I call it love. Thank you for listening to Daniel's story. Thank you for helping me make sure his voice is finally heard. If this story moved you, I think you'll love hearing about other cases where family members refused to accept official explanations and fought for the truth. Check out the other videos in the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because there are so many stories like Daniel's that deserve to be told. And remember, sometimes the only difference between a victim and a survivor is someone who refuses to let their story end with a lie. See you in the next one.